Cathedral is one of the most beautiful Renaissance buildings in Italy, 16th century. Wonderful harmony, you see? Like in music. It's a library, designed by one of the best Italian artists, by and in front of the library.
The Basilica of St. Mark's, as seen and admired today by millions of tourists who every year flock to the huge square in the heart of Venice, was begun by the powerful Doge, Domenico Contarini, who in 1063 initiated its construction on the remains of a very ancient pre-existing church considered too modest for the powerful Republic, now become aware of its own strength and importance. A part of the walls and some of the more precious decorative elements of the old basilica were incorporated in the new church. The singular aspect and complexity of styles of this new structure were the result of a diversity of inspirations and the collaboration of artists of different origins. The marble revestments, columns of great beauty, exotic works of art, and precious and curious objects of various types have remote origins and form a legendary history in which recur the names of Byzantium and Jerusalem. The archway of St. Alipio at the extreme left of the facade contains in its vault one of the oldest mosaics of the basilica and is decorated with a heterogeneous series of sculptures. The arch itself, a Moorish form, was built in the early 13th century. The discs with the evangelist symbols are from the beginning of the 14th century. On the architrave is an early Christian relief of the 5th century with scenes from the life of Christ. Originally, the facade of the basilica had a more solemn and severe aspect. The architectural complex of St. Mark's is in many ways difficult to understand. This is due above all to subtle and complicated artistic reasons related to the conception of the church itself and to the models that inspired it, especially the churches of the 12 Apostles and St. Sophia in Constantinople and the Church of St. John the Evangelist in Ephesus, as well as the almost contemporary Cathedral of St. Front in Périgueux. The basilica seems to have no principal facade, because none of its fronts seems to decisively prevail over the others. The various sides are a complex of planes and volumes more or less projecting and retracted in niches and the concentric repetition of arches. The entrances of the church are actually not in symmetric position. The variety of entrances is in fact one of the characteristics of the architecture of St. Mark's. The church is indeed even called the Basilica of the 11 Doors of Bronze, and each one of these entrances, in addition to ornamental motifs of great historic interest, has its own character and history. The south flank of the basilica, which originally reflected in the water of the lagoon, is richly revested with marbles. It is particularly animated by an accretion of spatial elements, such as the loggia at the corner angle, the so-called Colonna del Bando, from which decrees were once proclaimed, the pilasters brought to Venice from Acre. In 1504, in order to build the Zen Chapel, the entrance into the atrium directly from the piazzetta was closed off. This closure completely alters the architectural impression of the atrium, and by reflection that of the whole church. The entrance from the piazzetta was the most important. It was the entrance from the water, which by tradition in Venice is always the principal one. Thus, this entrance on the south side of the church was the most elaborate, and still today its decoration reveals a particular sumptuousness and singular beauty. In St. Mark's, all the principal straight routes to be taken terminate in apses and little exedras with radial niches. Opposite the archway of St. Alipio and near the Porta dei Fiori, in the north arm of the atrium, is an exedra with radial niches in which is the entrance door to the church, surmounted by a very old mosaic. The most complex and most difficult part of the church to understand visually, but the one that makes the whole architectural complex of St. Mark's so fascinating, is the atrium and the subsidiary spaces lining its perimeter. It creates an atmosphere of expectation, preparing the visitor for the interior spaces of the basilica. The mosaics of the atrium, or narthex, among the most precious of the whole church, represent scenes from the Old Testament. Indeed, the Basilica of St. Mark's constitutes an open Bible that extends over 4,000 square meters of walls and vaults. The vaulting of the atrium, with its alternation of cupolas and arches, creates a continuous architectural rhythm that can be appreciated only by walking the length of this long and narrow space, which at one time was the route actually taken by ceremonial processions. In the decoration of the cupolas of the atrium, the mosaicists have drawn inspiration from Exodus and Genesis and the stories of Abraham. The most spectacular is the cupola of the creation. This cupola recounts 24 episodes from the creation of the world, arranged in 3 concentric rings. The innermost ring depicts the creation of heaven, earth, and the firmament. The middle ring, the creation of the sun and the moon, of the animals, and man in the earthly paradise. In the outermost ring is the story of Adam and Eve. In this scene, which appears above the door of St. Peter, Abraham receives at his table the angels who predict to him the birth of Isaac. Behind the angels is his wife, Sarah. The mosaics are from the 13th century, and they show the inspiration of the Romanesque tradition of northern Italy. The story of the flood gave the artist motive to depict a series of scenes from nature, in which he achieved an exceptional expressiveness, especially in the rendering of natural phenomena and the animals. Following the scenes of the flood are a series of scenes from the life of Noah. The drunkenness of Noah. The sons of Noah cover his nakedness. The death of Noah. In the center, opposite the main entrance, hidden behind the carved slabs and screens, is the tomb of Felicita Michiel, wife of the Doge Vitale Falier. In the Zen chapel, which, as we have already noted, was originally the entrance to the basilica from the sea, there is some effective Venetian Romanesque sculpture. The altar, dedicated to the Madonna, is a work of Antonio Lombardo, executed at the beginning of the 16th century. The mosaics go back to the 13th century and represent the recurrent theme of the life of St. John the Evangelist. The 8 figures of prophets in semicircles are alternately in mosaic and sculpture, following the rhythm of the niches which scan the space. The decoration of the baptistry was commissioned in the 14th century by the Doge Andrea Dandolo, who is buried here. For the most part, the mosaics represent scenes from the life of St. John the Baptist. They were finished in the first half of the 14th century in a style that can be termed Gothic. The mosaics of the baptistry form a cycle apart. These scenes show a relationship with mid-14th century panel painting, and in particular they bring to mind the work of Paolo Veneziano. Venetian art remained faithful to its Byzantine origins, and the Gothic style, widely adopted in Italy at the time, was here made to comply with the exigencies of the mosaic technique, especially in the masterpiece of this cycle, the Feast of Herod and the Dance of Salome. Even in the baptistry, there is a collection of small sculpture and carved fragments of precious marbles. Bas-reliefs, railing slabs, friezes and corbels, artistic documents of legendary origin that in early times inspired wonder and admiration in the visitors to the basilica. At a first glance, one notices that next to the oldest artistic styles, early Christian, Frankish Lombard, and Byzantine, are placed elements of Romanesque art of the Po Valley. All this forms a part of the history and character of the church and of the political religiosity which created this relic-filled basilica under the attentive direction of the highest officials of the state. To this was added the Venetian custom of transporting precious marbles from the Orient, in keeping with the city's character as a maritime republic. Made up of large rectangular sections inlaid with geometric designs, the pavement of St. Mark's is itself a mosaic. This carpet of diversely colored marbles is composed of elements cut in varying shapes and connected according to a geometric design with other compositions formed of uniformly shaped tesserae. In the pre-Romanesque style, the two techniques alternate and are worked together into a larger pattern contained within a rectangular space. A great many pieces of sculpture coming from distant places and from other monuments have been used to decorate specific parts of the church, both inside and out. In analyzing these works, it is very difficult to identify their origins. But what is important is to appreciate the plastic and iconographic significance they have assumed within the context of St. Mark's, as well as the function they served in forming that particular Venetian character of the sculpture found throughout the whole city. The antique pieces deriving from the early Christian art of Ravenna are the most indigenous and distinctive of the complex of medieval sculpture of St. Mark's, followed in time by Byzantine, Romanesque, and Gothic works, all woven together with an extraordinary effect. The iconostasis, the marble screen separating the presbytery from the rest of the church, was built in 1394 by Jacobello and Pierpaolo dalle Massenie, and evokes an architectural element common to Byzantine churches. The Pala d'Oro consists of a block of solid gold decorated with 80 enamels and 2,500 gems. The Pala d'Oro is the most conspicuous and spectacular product of the ambitions of the Venetian state. Contributions for this fabulous work came from the Venetian merchants who had acquired great wealth through their trade with Asia Minor. The ciborium, or altar canopy, is supported by 4 columns decorated with a famous cycle of reliefs of the 5th century. These columns add a scenic effect by providing a perspective frame for the magnificence of the Pala d'Oro. Jacobello and Pierpaolo dalle Massegne also sculpted the figures that decorate the top of the iconostasis, the Virgin and the 12 Apostles, which constitute the most important complex of Gothic sculpture in Venice. The presbytery is separated from the rest of the church by the iconostasis, which forms a sort of diaphragm between the area used by the faithful and that reserved for the officiating clergy. The scenographic skill with which the church is presented to anyone entering is here applied with precise theatrical and choreographic intention. The religious and political ceremonies and the coronation of the Doge had to take place in an almost mysterious and rarefied atmosphere. Only at the very end of the ritual, with the presentation of the supreme authorities in the tribune situated above the level of the presbytery, was there to be a sensational final act to arouse applause. One might say that in certain ways, the architecture of St. Mark's comes near to the dramatic and psychologically tormented situation of modern man. The altar of the Chapel of the Masculi, which takes its name from a Venetian guild, is Gothic in style and adorned with a statue by Bartolomeo Bon. The evolution of the art of mosaic leads to the pictorial grandiosity of the vault, where the medium is transformed into compositional solutions of great breadth. The figures were created by famous mosaicists on the cartoons of great painters of the 16th century. These are 4 scenes from the life of the Virgin executed between 1430 and 1450 by Michele Giambono and finished by Jacopo Bellini, Andrea Mantegna, and Andrea del Castagno. These mosaics constitute one of the first works of the Renaissance in Venice. The iconographic program of the vast mosaic decoration remained unaltered despite new mosaic works made to replace very old ones ruined by time. In the old mosaics of the Basilica, the following styles may be distinguished. Mosaics obviously influenced by Tuscan art of the early 15th century and even attributed to Paolo Uccello. Mosaics of a style closely related to Byzantine schemes in which are seen the influence of the earliest mosaics at Torcello, of those of the Basilica of Ursus in Ravenna, and of the work of the monasteries of Macedonia. Venetian Byzantine mosaics that interpret Byzantine models of the 12th and 13th centuries with a strong local character. Mosaics showing marked Romanesque influence. And finally, mosaics of the mid-14th century with Gothic characteristics compatible with the evolution of Byzantine art, from which stems the gold-ground panel painting of Paolo Veneziano and the major painters of the 14th century. Among the mosaics most closely related to the Byzantine iconography should be noted the numerous forceful figures of saints, evidently inspired by original icons. The Venetian mosaicists were not uninfluenced by the new contributions of Western painting, manuscript decoration, and sculpture, and they achieved an exquisite stylization of form and elegant use of line. From precisely this complex stylistic moment are the scenes represented on the arches next to the dome, which can be numbered among the most important figurative mosaics of any epoch. Of all the mosaics in the Basilica, the group of episodes of the life of Christ exhibit the most original stylization. One of the most famous mosaics of St. Mark's is the Agony in the Garden, from the first half of the 13th century. This large work represents Christ praying in the garden, Christ inviting the apostles to pray, and Christ reproaching Peter. The human intensity of these episodes and the description of the landscape go beyond the Byzantine tradition, endowing the whole scene with an unusual poetic force. The dome of the Pentecost depicts the descent of the Holy Spirit upon the apostles. Beneath the feet of the apostles are represented the peoples to whom the apostles preached. The oldest mosaics of St. Mark's date from the end of the 11th to the middle of the 16th century. The earliest decoration goes back to the Doge Domenico Selvo, not long after the year 1000, and continues under diverse influences up to the beginning of the 15th century, when the local tradition can be said to have ended and Tuscan artists summoned to the city initiated a new technique. This mosaic of the 13th century, in the right arm of the transept of the basilica, represents the finding of the body of St. Mark. Within the Byzantine scheme, the contributions of the Western world with which Venice was continually in contact became always more important. Indeed, the mosaics of St. Mark's reveal a sensitivity to the beginnings and development of Romanesque and Gothic painting in Italy, the influence of which was continually mediated by the taste and sensitiveness of the mosaicist of the basilica. The fascination that color exercised on the Venetians, of which the Basilica of St. Mark's is a striking example, has distant origins and is related to that particular feeling for color that was to be found among the Christian and Islamic populations of the Eastern Mediterranean. Even from an historical point of view, St. Mark's represents a decisive document in the remarkable adventure of the city of Venice.
The end.